Hello, this is Sean O'Malley giving a brief for George Washington University, PSSL 6252, Emergency Management and Crisis Communication. What do you do when you or your country comes across something devastating and unexpected? What determines how you will move on and whether you will overcome the event or be completely lost? This is a case study on Pearl Harbor and the Yom Kippur War and how you can win the physical battle yet lose the psychological war. On December 7, 1941, was the day of infamy, when Japan systematically conducted a coordinated surprise attack on Pearl Harbor Naval Base, killing just over 2,400 people and sinking or damaging 19 ships, effectively destroying the Pacific Fleet of the United States. The Yom Kippur War was a coordinated attack during the Yom Kippur holiday, the holiest day on the Jewish calendar, which caught Israel completely off guard, leading to the death of approximately 2,800 soldiers and civilians, as well as destroying a large majority of their armor capabilities, which their military might was resting on. The U.S. ended up winning the war that Pearl Harbor led to, but more importantly, they won the psychological battle that was needed to move on and continue as a country. Israel, on the other hand, won the war but lost the psychological battle, and has caused a negative impact that we see even today. In the military, we have what we call significant emotional events. These are events that are unforgettable parts of our life and something that you typically have a lesson learned from. On a professional side, this is normally screwing up on a brief such as this one and having to go see your boss and having some direction from there. On a national level or national security level, for modern day, we're looking at 9/11. Every single one of us can remember where we were on 9/11 and what we were doing and the emotions we felt. And these emotions are what spurs the lessons learned. Our country has had to learn and adapt to many things because of 9/11, and this is very much the same for Pearl Harbor and the Yom Kippur War. Both of them were serious, significant emotional events for their countries. To understand why they're significant emotional events, we have to understand the background of both of these countries and where they're coming from. Both of them were coming out of a pretty significant war. The U.S. was a few years removed from World War I. After World War I, we have what we refer to as the lost generation. All these men coming back home who were physically, mentally, emotionally drained. They wanted nothing to do with international events or international politics. So the country as a whole kind of took what I would call the ostrich approach. We buried our head in the sand and try not to get involved in anything outside of our country itself. We just wanted to do some nation building ourselves. Israel, on the other hand, was a few years removed from the Seven-Day War. This is a war that once again saw an Arab coalition conducting a surprise attack on Israel. The difference with this one is that Israel pretty significantly single-handedly won this war and caused a great embarrassment to the Arab nations. This embarrassment led to an intense amount of national pride in the Israeli people and led them on to ultimately their devastation at the Yom Kippur War. Both of these previous wars led both the United States and Israel to fail to properly have a national intelligence estimate. The U.S. thought that there was no way that Japan would openly attack the U.S. Instead, they figured that they would attack their holdings in the Pacific Islands or attack other islands in there to gather more natural resources. They figured once that these attacks happened on these smaller islands that they would have more than enough time, as the U.S. was, to include Hawaii, was so geographically far removed from Japan itself. Israel, on the other hand, had what they considered to be the concept. The concept meant that the only way that the Arab world would attack them was if it was a coordinated plan, and with this coordinated plan, there would be more than ample warning for them to react to it and head it off. They also felt that Israel had complete air superiority and could easily beat back any attack that the Arab world threw at them. Neither countries heeded the warnings, the intelligence, or the blatant writing on the wall that these attacks and that these wars were coming. They missed the early warning signs of what would happen, to include for Israel, the Russian diplomats took all the Russian citizens out of Egypt and their surrounding countries. It was a very blatant, open move. Israel missed that warning. The U.S. missed the increase of intelligence and the rhetoric that was coming from the ambassador stationed in the U.S. Back to their home country, Japan. You cannot effectively plan what you fail to see or what you believe not to be true. Because of this, both countries were completely surprised, and the people were devastated due to these attacks. We learned about the tenuous relationship between the intelligence operations and the political world in our intelligence and strategic analysis course. We are taught that policy doesn't and shouldn't necessarily drive intelligence, and that intelligence professionals should give objective analysis to the policymakers so that way they can action them. The problem is that in both situations, the policymakers / the leaders of the countries allowed their personal viewpoints to overshadow the intelligence and directed the intelligence community to show them only what they wanted to hear and not what was actually happening around them. So as we can see, both the U.S. and Israel were the same in many ways when it comes to the pre-planning and the preparation for these attacks. So what really was the difference that allowed the U.S. to bounce back and Israel to remain stagnant and not roll with the punches that were thrown at them? In the military, we have a saying that everything starts and ends with leadership. We also have a saying that says that your unit can either succeed because of you or in spite of you. This is a perfect case, as it shows that Israel survived in spite of its leadership, not because of it. And the U.S. survived because of its leadership, not in spite of it. For the U.S., for president, we had Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was what I would consider to be the epitome of a leader and the epitome of what a crisis communication situation should be handled. He realized that leadership starts with trust and confidence. And this started with him well before Pearl Harbor, as he was trying to galvanize the country after World War I, going through the Great Depression. Luckily, like I said, he realized this before, and so he started what would later be called his fireside chats. These chats were meant to build up the trust and confidence that the American people had in the leadership and to build a connection with them. Because of this, the American people felt that he truly had their best intentions in mind in everything that he did. Once the attack happened, he gave the speech that all of us have heard, that this is a day that will live in infamy. This speech, after the attack, galvanized the American people because they had already built that trust in him, and they knew that he was leading them in the right direction. There was never any doubt about FDR's intentions were, and he was able to discreetly say and get the American people in the mindset that the Japanese and the Japanese government were evil and that there was something that had to be conquered and destroyed. This kept the people involved, informed, and gave them a direction to move into instead of resting on their fears. This started the country on a path to not only military victory, but ultimately the psychological victory that would be needed to effectively overcome this significant emotional event. Even after his death, his lasting influence as a leader allowed the country to continue on the path that he gave them. Israel, on the other hand, who they considered to be the grandmother of Israel. The prime minister was Golda Meir. Before she was the prime minister, she was a teacher and a politician. She was someone that everybody in that country trusted. They all thought that she would always protect them, that she always had the best intentions in mind, and that she would keep them well informed. Very similar to the mindset that FDR instilled in his people. But ultimately, this was also her downfall, as the Israeli people felt betrayed due to the attack and due to the way she handled it. The attack showed a weakness in her leadership by missing that, but what showed even more weakness in her leadership and that deteriorated the trust was her lack of action and her lack of surrounding herself with the correct people to handle a situation like this attack. They blamed her personally for it. They felt betrayed. Their national confidence and their pride and their security were all at that point in time were all destroyed. Previously, they had a feeling of invincibility and now the only feelings that they felt were fear and unknown. Leadership, especially in a crisis situation, is more than just communications to the people. It is making the correct decisions in a timely manner. FDR drove the American people to action. He did this by making a clear-cut strategic plan and ensured that everybody knew how they fit into it. He didn't have to tell each individual citizen what they had to do, but that trust and faith that he built up in them allowed them to effectively move themselves into this plan for a way forward. There was no doubts in the American people's mind that they would be fine, that the U.S. would get its revenge, and that this would never happen again because FDR had this plan for them. Israel, on the other hand, had lost their will to fight. Prime Minister Meyer failed to articulate her plan both to the military and to the people themselves. This failure to engage the military and to build that complete trust with the military leadership ultimately ended up delaying the calling up of the reserves and the military commanders engaging in the fight because they did not believe that they were actually being attacked. The Israeli people saw their entire lives being destroyed in front of them, and the government took days to respond. The sense of invincibility was gone, and Prime Minister Meyer did nothing to fix this, partially because there was no contingency plan for when the country lost power. Because of this, the people were forced to take action and to save their country and save their lives in spite of their leadership instead of for it. At the end of both wars, you can see a completely different mentality between the U.S. and Israel. The U.S. was celebrating a great accomplishment and feeling great about themselves. They felt that there was a plan in place to prevent another significant emotional event, and that they were a solution, part of the solution to the problem, and that they were safe, and that their government had their best interests in heart. Israel, on the other hand, due to their poor leadership and their poor communication and their poor planning, turned to finger pointing and the blame game. There had to be a reason why they lost their feeling of invincibility, and that they were now a soft target for the Arab world to attack in a continuous fashion. Everyone wanted to know who was at fault. Was it the government? Was it the intelligence advisors? Or was it the new technology that they thought they had? Or even was it the people themselves that caused this? Ultimately, it was rightfully determined that it was the leadership that failed, and the leadership was removed. Significant emotional events have profound, lasting impressions on the people and their countries. It takes a strong leader to overcome them with leadership qualities and the proper use of communication and building that strategic plan for the country to build off of. FDR left his people on the high ground and gave them that plan, where Prime Minister Meyer failed to do this for her people, and because of it, her nation has lost that national pride and has living with that constant fear.